The richest man in 3 counties stood at his parlor window and watched another father drive away empty-handed. Silas Granger had just refused the 7th marriage proposal this year. This one came with a dowry of prime grazing land and a daughter who barely spoke above a whisper. He'd said no before the tea went cold. The townspeople called him heartless. The ranch hands called him smart, but none of them saw what happened after the carriages left, when the house went quiet and Silas stood alone in rooms too big for one man, wondering if he'd built a fortune just to die in it by himself. If you're watching from somewhere far from Montana, drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you about the winter that changed everything. The Montana Territory wind came down from the mountains with teeth in it, the kind that found every gap in a man's coat and reminded him winter didn't negotiate. Silas Granger stood on his porch in the pre-dawn dark, coffee steaming in his hand, and watched the eastern sky bruise from black to purple. 42 years old, 12,000 acres, cattle that wore his brand from here to the railroad, a house with 14 rooms and nobody in any of them but him. He took a swallow of coffee and tasted ash. The Double G Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom, and Silas ruled it with the kind of precision that made other men either envious or nervous. His fences ran straight, his books balanced to the penny, his cowboys showed up on time or found work elsewhere. Everything in its place, everything accounted for, except the one thing money couldn't buy, and pride wouldn't let him ask for. Behind him, the house waited. Grand staircase. Imported rugs. A dining table that seated 20. His mother had designed it all before the fever took her, back when she still believed Silas would fill those rooms with children and laughter. That was before she learned what her son was made of, iron and ice and the kind of stubbornness that could outlast a drought. "Boss." Silas turned. Tom Hendricks, his foreman, came around the corner of the house with that particular look that meant trouble or gossip, and on the Double G those were often the same thing. "What is it?" "Another one coming up the road." Tom jerked his chin toward the valley. "Fancy rig, matched horses. I'd bet my month's pay there's a pretty daughter inside and a land deed in Daddy's pocket." Silas felt something cold settle in his chest. "When?" "Within the hour. Way they're moving." "Tell the boys to clear out of the main barn. I don't want an audience for this one." Tom grinned. "Too late for that. Cookie's already taking bets on how many minutes she lasts. Smart money says she don't make it to dessert." "Tell Cookie if he's got time to gamble, he's got time to fix the porch rail on the bunkhouse." "Yes, sir." Tom's grin didn't fade. He'd worked for Silas 8 years, long enough to know the difference between actual anger and the kind of gruffness that was just armor. "You want me to polish up the no thank you speech, or are you planning something new this time?" "I'm planning to have breakfast in peace before I have to explain, again, why I'm not interested in bartering my future for bottomland and bloodlines." Tom sobered slightly. "You know the talk in town's getting louder, boss. Some folks saying it ain't natural, a man with your means staying single, saying maybe there's something wrong with you." "There is something wrong with me," Silas said flatly. "I prefer my own company to that of social climbing fathers and daughters who've been trained like show horses to smile on command. If that makes me unnatural, I'll wear the label." "Suit yourself." Tom headed toward the barn, then called back over his shoulder. "But sooner or later, you're going to have to ask yourself what you're saving all this for." Silas watched him go and didn't answer because the question had teeth, and he'd already felt them plenty. The carriage that rolled up the lane an hour later was even fancier than Tom had described, lacquered black with gold trim, pulled by a matched pair of bays that probably cost more than most men made in a year. The driver wore livery. Actual livery, like they were in Boston instead of Montana Territory. Silas stood on his porch and waited, expressionless. The carriage door opened and a man stepped out, late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of groomed beard that required daily maintenance. Silas recognized the type instantly, self-made wealth, desperate to marry into old money legitimacy. The man turned and offered his hand to someone inside. A young woman emerged, blonde, delicate-featured, dressed in pale blue silk that had no business within 100 miles of cattle country. She took one look at the ranch, and Silas saw it in her eyes. The calculation, the appraisal, the mental tally of what all this was worth. "Mr. Granger!" The father strode forward with his hand extended. "Marcus Pemberton, out of Denver. This is my daughter, Lily, we've come a long way to make your acquaintance. Silas shook the offered hand briefly. You should have written first. Would have saved you the trip. Pemberton's smile didn't falter. Ah, but some things are better discussed in person, don't you think? Business opportunities, strategic alliances, the kind of partnerships that benefit both families. I'm not interested in partnerships that involve your daughter, Mr. Pemberton. I'm sure she's a fine young lady, but I'm not in the market for a wife. The girl, Lily, flinched slightly. Her father's face reddened. Now, see here, Granger, you haven't even heard what I'm offering. I've got mineral rights to 3 sections of prime. Not interested. But if you'd just listen, Mr. Pemberton. Silas let his voice drop to the register that made his ranch hands stand straighter. You drove a long way to hear something I could have told you in a telegraph. I don't want your land. I don't want your business connections. I don't want to marry your daughter. What I want is to finish my breakfast in peace before I ride fence line. Now you can turn that carriage around, or you can stand here arguing until the coffee gets cold, but the answer won't change either way. Lily Pemberton made a small sound, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. When Silas glanced at her, he saw something complicated in her expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. You didn't want to come either, he said quietly. She met his eyes. No, sir, I didn't. Lily! Her father's voice cracked like a whip. It's true, Father. You know it's true. You've paraded me in front of every wealthy bachelor between here and San Francisco, and I've smiled until my face ached, and not one of them has seen me as anything but inventory. That's enough. No, it's not. Lily's voice stayed soft, but there was steel underneath. Mr. Granger is the first one who's been honest about it. At least he has the decency not to pretend this is about love or compatibility. He's not interested in a transaction, and I respect him for it. Silas found himself unexpectedly impressed. The girl had more spine than her silk dress suggested. Marcus Pemberton sputtered, face going from red to purple. Get back in the carriage. We're leaving. Gladly. Lily turned to Silas and gave him a small, genuine smile. Good luck, Mr. Granger. I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for. I hope you do the same, Miss Pemberton. He watched the carriage retreat down the lane, dust rising in its wake. From the barn, he heard Cookie's voice. 8 minutes. Pay up, boys. Silas went back inside his empty house and finished his cold breakfast alone. It became a pattern, almost predictable as the seasons. Spring brought the rancher's daughters, practical girls in modest dresses, raised to manage households and bear children without complaint. Their fathers talked water rights and shared fence lines while the daughters sat with their hands folded, eyes downcast, already resigned to whatever bargain got struck. Silas said no to all of them. Summer brought the town merchant's daughters, shopkeepers' girls with good manners and better arithmetic, trained to keep books and smile at customers. Their fathers brought ledgers showing profit margins, suggested how a partnership could benefit everyone. Silas turned them away before the noon heat broke. Fall brought the settlers' daughters, tough, work-worn young women who looked at his land with hunger, and his house with something like grief. Their fathers came with debts instead of dowries, desperation instead of pride, asking if maybe Silas might consider taking a wife who knew the value of hard work. He sent them home with enough money to see them through winter and instructions never to come back. Winter brought the society daughters from back east, polished, educated, utterly out of place in their velvet and lace. Their fathers were businessmen smelling opportunity in the territory's growth, imagining dynasties built on railroad shares and political connections. Silas showed them the door before the snow on their boots had time to melt. In the bunkhouse, the betting pool grew. Cookie kept a tally board, 43 proposals in 3 years. The longest visit lasted 22 minutes. A banker's daughter from Helena who'd had the nerve to suggest Silas needed refinement. The shortest was 90 seconds. A widow with 3 children who'd taken one look at Silas's face and said she'd rather starve than live with a man who looked at people like numbers in a ledger. That one had stung because it was true. Tom Hendricks watched it all with the patient concern of a man who'd been around long enough to see the cost of pride. One evening, after a particularly painful encounter with a rancher's daughter who'd actually wept when Silas refused her, Tom cornered his boss in the barn. You planning to die alone in that big house? Silas didn't look up from the bridle he was mending. Planning to die with my choices being my own. That enough for you? No, sir, it ain't. Tom pulled up a hay bale and sat. I've known you 8 years, boss. Watched you build this place from good to great. Seen you work harder than any 3 men combined. But I'll tell you something. Every time you send one of those girls away, you stand a little straighter, talk a little colder, like you're proving something. Maybe I am. What? That you can't be bought? Hell, we all know that. You proved it the first time you said no. Silas set down the bridle. You ever wonder why they keep coming, Tom? It's not about me. It's never been about me. Those fathers look at my land and see dollars. Those daughters look at my house and see security. Nobody looks at me and sees a man. They see an opportunity. And you're what? Waiting for someone who doesn't? I'm not waiting for anything. I'm just done pretending loneliness is worse than living a lie. Tom was quiet for a long moment. My Martha used to say the saddest thing in the world was watching someone choose to be right over choosing to be happy. Your Martha was a wise woman. She was, and she'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. Being right and being alone still leaves you alone. Silas picked up the bridle again. Then I guess I'll be alone. But after Tom left, Silas sat in the lamplight of the barn and felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. Alone. It was a choice he'd made deliberately, carefully, with full knowledge of what it cost. And yet every time a carriage rolled away, every time he closed the door on another polished proposal, something in him whispered that maybe Tom was right. Maybe being right still left you standing in an empty house, listening to the wind, wondering what you were saving everything for. The town of Bitterroot Springs had opinions about Silas Granger, and it shared them freely. In the Mercantile, the shopkeeper's wife told anyone who'd listen, unnatural, that's what it is. A man that wealthy, that established, turning down every decent girl who crosses his path. Mark my words, there's something wrong there. At the saloon, the Cowboys debated it over whiskey. Maybe he had his heart broke once and never got over it. Or maybe he just likes his life the way it is. Or maybe he's holding out for something none of us can see. In the church, the minister worried, a man needs the softening influence of a wife, the purpose of children. Without that, what becomes of his soul? At the dress shop, the seamstress who'd made gowns for half the rejected daughters had a different theory. I think he's afraid. All that money, all that success, and underneath it, he's just scared he might actually have to let someone close enough to disappoint him. And the postmaster sorting mail offered his perspective. He's not scared, he's just honest. Most men would take the best offer and convince themselves it was love. Granger won't lie to himself or anyone else. You ask me, that takes more courage than saying yes. But the loudest voice belonged to Sadie Mitchell, owner of the boarding house and unofficial keeper of town gossip. She held court every afternoon on her front porch, pronouncing judgment on all matters social and moral. That Granger boy has always been cold, she declared to her audience of nodding heads. Even as a child, calculating. His mother spoiled him, gave him ideas above his station. Now he thinks he's too good for any woman in 3 territories. Pride, that's all it is. Pride and ice where his heart should be. What none of them knew, what Silas had never told anyone, was the truth. He'd been 23 when he fell in love with Rebecca Marsh. She was the daughter of a failing rancher, beautiful in that quiet way that snuck up on a man. She'd smile at him across the church pews, and he'd felt something crack open in his chest, warm and terrifying. He'd courted her properly, brought flowers, asked her father's permission, saved every penny to buy a ring he could barely afford. And the night he'd finally worked up the courage to propose, she'd looked at him with something like pity and said, I can't, Silas. You're going to be something. I can see it. But right now, you're nothing but dirt and dreams. Thomas Carver has a house. He has money. He has certainty. I can't bet my future on your maybe. She'd married Thomas 3 months later. They'd moved to Oregon. Silas had heard she had 4 children now, a comfortable life, everything she'd wanted. And he'd spent 19 years making sure no woman would ever look at him and see not enough again. The Double G wasn't just a ranch. It was proof. Evidence. Insurance against ever being the poor boy with empty pockets and a heart full of hope. He'd built it deliberately, methodically, until he was the richest man in the territory, until women looked at him and saw too much instead of too little. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd wanted to be enough, and now he was too much. Either way, he was alone, but at least now it was his choice. But the winter of 1882 came hard and early, the kind that made old-timers shake their heads and predict worse to come. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep in the valleys, and the temperature hadn't crawled above zero in weeks. The cattle huddled in windbreaks. The ranch hands worked in shifts, breaking ice in water troughs and hauling feed to the far pastures. Silas stood at his office window and watched his empire disappear under white. On his desk, the ledgers showed profit even in lean years. He'd planned well, saved strategically, built reserves that would see them through. The ranch would survive. The cattle would survive. Everything would survive except the silence. It was late afternoon when Tom knocked on the office door, snow still dusting his shoulders. "Boss, we got a situation." Silas looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing. "How bad?" "Not the cattle, something else." Tom hesitated, which was unusual. "There's someone at the gate. Been standing there about 10 minutes, not knocking, not asking for anything, just standing." "Another proposal?" "Don't think so. No carriage. She rode in on a borrowed horse, looks like. No fancy dress, no father, just her." Something in Tom's voice made Silas set down his pen. "She?" "Young woman, maybe late 20s, work clothes. Looks like she's been riding hard." "In this weather?" "In this weather." Silas pulled on his coat. "Let's see what she wants." They walked through the snow to the front gate, breath frosting in the air. And there she was. A woman in a worn canvas coat and men's trousers, standing beside a sorrel gelding that looked as tired as she did. Her dark hair had escaped its braid, blowing across a face that was striking without being pretty. Strong features, direct eyes, the kind of face that had seen weather and work and hadn't flinched from either. She watched Silas approach without the calculated smile he'd come to expect from female visitors. No pretense, no performance, just steady, measuring attention that made him feel unexpectedly off balance. "Mr. Granger?" "That's right. My name is Eliza Hart. I need to speak with you." "If this is about marriage, it's not." Her voice was quiet but firm, roughened slightly by cold. "I'm not here to offer myself as a bride or make any kind of bargain. I just need to talk to you. 5 minutes of your time. After that, if you want me gone, I'll go." Silas studied her. No games in her eyes, no angles he could detect, just a woman asking for 5 minutes in weather cold enough to kill. "Tom, take her horse to the barn. Get it warm and fed." He turned to Eliza. 5 minutes. Inside. She followed him to the house without a word. In the entrance hall, she stamped snow from her boots and took off her hat but kept her coat on as if she didn't expect to stay long enough to need comfort. Silas led her to the kitchen, warmer than the formal parlor, less pretentious. Cookie had left coffee on the stove. He poured 2 cups and pushed one across the table to her. "You said 5 minutes. Clock's running." Eliza wrapped her hands around the cup, and he saw they were work-roughened, scarred across the knuckles. Not the hands of a woman who'd been decorative. "I'll be direct because you strike me as a man who values that. I've heard the stories about you. The richest rancher in 3 counties who turns down every woman who comes calling. The town thinks you're heartless. Some say you're damaged. Others say you're smart. And what do you think?" She met his eyes. "I think you're alone, and I think you chose it, but I also think—" She paused, seemed to gather something in herself. "I think maybe you're tired of it." The words hit harder than they should have. Silas kept his face neutral. "What makes you say that?" "Because I see it in your eyes. The same thing I see in the mirror." She took a slow breath. "I'm not here to marry you, Mr. Granger. I'm not here to solve your loneliness or mine. I'm here because I heard about a man who'd rather be alone than be lied to, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd understand something nobody else has. Which is that sometimes being alone isn't about pride or fear or damage." Her voice dropped. "Sometimes it's just the honest acknowledgement that you'd rather live with your own truth than someone else's comfortable fiction." Silas sat down across from her. The 5 minutes were already gone, but he didn't mention it. "Who are you, Eliza Hart?" Someone who made different choices than you and ended up in the same place. She looked down at her coffee. I was married once, young, stupid, thought love was enough to weather anything. Turned out I was wrong. He die? Eventually, but the marriage died first. She said it without drama, just fact. He was a good man when things were good, but when the farm failed, when the drought came, when nothing went right, he needed someone to blame. I was convenient. Silas saw the truth in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like someone who'd learned to take up less space. He hit you. He did. And I stayed longer than I should have, kept thinking if I just tried harder, loved better, worked more. She stopped. Took me 3 years to understand I was trying to fix something that was broken before I ever touched it. By the time he drank himself to death, I'd already mourned the marriage. I'd already mourned the girl I'd been. Where have you been since? Working, ranches mostly, kitchens, anywhere that would take a woman with no references and a dead husband's debts following her. She finally looked up. I'm good with numbers. I'm better with horses. I can cook, manage books, mend fence, treat sick cattle. I work hard, and I don't cause trouble. Sounds like you're asking for a job. I'm not. Eliza set down her cup. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consider something nobody's offered you before, which is company without conditions. Someone to share the work and the silence, the good days and the hard ones, without pretending it's something it's not. No marriage. No expectations beyond honesty and shared labor. Just two people who'd rather build something real than live alone in the middle of everything they've achieved. Silas stared at her. In 3 years, 43 women had stood in this house offering themselves in exchange for his wealth. Not one had offered simple partnership. You don't know me. No. But I know what I saw in your eyes when I rode up. The same thing you saw in mine, I'd wager. She stood. I'm staying at the boarding house in town. I've got enough money for another week, maybe 2 if I'm careful. You don't have to decide anything right now. But if you want to talk more, really talk, not the performance everyone else brings, you know where to find me. She headed for the door. Silas found himself standing, moving after her. Wait. She turned. Why me? If you just wanted work, there are other ranches. Safer bets than the man everyone calls heartless. Eliza smiled slightly. Because everyone else wants something from you. And I think you're tired of being wanted for the wrong reasons. I'm offering to want nothing except the truth, whatever that looks like. She was gone before he could respond, walking back into the snow and the wind. Through the window, Silas watched Tom bring her horse around, watched her mount with the easy competence of someone who'd spent years in the saddle. She didn't look back at the house. And for the first time in 3 years, Silas stood in his empty kitchen and felt something shift, not hope exactly, but possibility. The clock showed her 5 minutes had turned into 20. He hadn't noticed when it happened. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window and watched moonlight turn the snow blue, thinking about Eliza Hart and her impossible offer. Company without conditions. Partnership without pretense. It sounded too simple to be real. And yet, the door to his loneliness hadn't been locked from the outside. He'd bolted it himself deliberately after Rebecca. He'd told himself it was strength, choosing solitude over settling. But maybe Eliza was right. Maybe there was a difference between being alone because you chose it and being alone because you were too afraid to choose anything else. Below his window, the ranch stretched silent under stars. 12,000 acres of proof that he was enough, that he'd built something that mattered. But late at night, when the wind howled and the house creaked, he couldn't escape the question Tom had asked. What was he saving it all for? The sunrise would bring new work. The cattle needed tending regardless of what human dramas played out in the main house. Life would continue exactly as it had. Unless. Silas stood there until the first gray light touched the mountains, thinking about a woman with scarred hands and honest eyes, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was tired of being right, if it meant always being alone. When morning came, he'd ride into town. He'd find Eliza Hart. And he'd ask the question he'd never allowed himself before. What if there was another way? The ride into Bitterroot Springs took longer than usual. The snow had drifted across the road in places, and Silas's horse picked its way carefully through the white expanse. The morning sun turned everything to blinding crystal, and he had to squint against the glare as the town's scattered buildings came into view. He'd made this ride 1,000 times, but today felt different. Today he was riding towards something instead of away from it, and the distinction settled in his chest like a stone, heavy but somehow anchoring. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a 2-story structure that had seen better days. Sadie Mitchell's domain, where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee, and nothing happened that didn't get reported, analyzed, and judged by sunset. Silas tied his horse to the rail and stood for a moment, aware that walking through that door would set tongues wagging for weeks. He didn't care. The front room smelled of bacon grease and old wood smoke. Sadie stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes widening when she saw who'd entered. "Mr. Granger, this is unexpected." Her tone suggested she was already composing the story she'd tell later. "What brings you here?" "I'm looking for one of your guests, Eliza Hart." Sadie's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "The Hart woman? She's in room 6, but I should tell you." "Which way?" "Top of the stairs, last door on the left." "But Mr. Granger, I really must say that a man of your standing visiting an unmarried woman's room is highly—" Silas was already climbing the stairs. Behind him, he heard Sadie's scandalized gasp and knew by nightfall the entire town would know he'd come calling. Let them talk. They'd been talking for 3 years anyway. He knocked on the door marked 6. Waited. Knocked again. "It's open." Eliza sat at a small table by the window, account books spread before her. She looked up without surprise, as if she'd been expecting him, or as if his arrival was neither hoped for nor dreaded, simply accepted as possibility. "Mr. Granger, you said if I wanted to talk, I'd know where to find you." "I did." She gestured to the room's only other chair. "Though I imagine Mrs. Mitchell is already planning how to phrase this in a way that damages both our reputations most efficiently. Silas sat. "My reputation can handle it." "Yours?" "I lost my reputation when I married a drunk and stayed with him through the hitting. What Sadie Mitchell thinks of me is pretty far down my list of concerns." She closed the ledger. "You came all this way in the snow. Must have been thinking hard." "I was." "And?" He looked at her directly. "I want to understand what you're actually offering, not the pretty words from yesterday. The truth." Eliza leaned back in her chair. "Fair enough. The truth is, I'm 28 years old and I'm tired. Tired of working myself half to death for wages that barely keep me fed. Tired of moving from place to place because eventually some man decides a woman alone is an invitation. Tired of pretending I'm not smart enough to manage more than laundry and cooking when I've been keeping ranches running while their owners took credit." "So you want my ranch?" "No." Her voice was firm. "I want a partnership that acknowledges what I bring to the table. I want to work land that means something, build something that lasts, and do it alongside someone who won't expect me to pretend to be less than I am. You've got the land and the resources. I've got the skills and the willingness to work. Together, we could make the double G even better than it is. Without marriage. Without marriage. Without pretending this is about love or romance or anything except two capable people choosing to face life together instead of separately." She met his eyes. "You were honest with all those society daughters. You told them you wouldn't buy a marriage. I'm offering you the same honesty in return. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I won't perform affection I don't feel, but I will work harder than any hand you've got, manage your books better than you do yourself, and never ask you to be anything except exactly who you are." Silas felt something loosen in his chest. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's probably the most complicated thing either of us could choose. People will talk. They'll call it scandalous. They'll say, 'I'm your mistress,' or 'you're my employer playing at something inappropriate.' We'll both be judged for it. You're willing to accept that?" "Mr. Granger, I've been judged every day since I married poorly, judged for staying, judged for leaving, judged for working men's jobs, judged for being a woman alone. I stopped letting their judgment dictate my choices about 2 years ago." She paused. "The question is whether you're willing to accept it. You've spent 3 years protecting your solitude. This would mean giving that up, not for romance, but for reality. For another person in your space, your business, your life, someone who'll see you at your worst and call you on it. Someone who won't worship you or fear you, just work beside you. And what do you get out of it? A home. Real work that matters. A partner who won't raise his hand when things get hard. Her voice didn't waver. And the chance to build something that's mine, ours, instead of always working to make someone else's dream come true. Silas stood and walked to the window. Below, Main Street crawled with morning activity. The mercantile opening, the blacksmith firing his forge. Normal life, normal people, living normal lies about normal happiness. He'd rejected that path decisively, repeatedly. But Eliza wasn't offering him normal. She was offering him something he'd never considered, radical honesty packaged as partnership. I had my heart broken once, he said without turning. Young, stupid, thought love was everything. She chose security over me, and I spent 19 years making sure no woman could ever look at me and see not enough again. I know. He turned. How? Because I see it. The way you built this fortress around yourself. The way you test everyone who comes near. You're not heartless, Mr. Granger. You're just protecting a wound that never quite healed. And you think you're different from the others? From Rebecca? I think I'm honest about what I want and what I don't. I'm not looking for love, and I'm sure as hell not looking for security at the cost of my self-respect. I'm looking for a working partnership with someone who values capability over performance. If that's not you, fine. But don't tell me I'm the same as those society daughters with their dowries and expectations. They wanted to own you. I just want to work beside you. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with possibility. Outside, church bells rang the hour. Inside, two people who'd been alone for different reasons stood at the edge of something neither quite understood. If I say yes to this, Silas began. There's no contract, Eliza interrupted, no legal obligation. Either of us can walk away whenever we want. The only thing binding us would be our word that we'll be honest with each other, work hard, and not pretend this is something it's not. People will assume let them assume we'll know the truth. My foreman's going to have questions. Then answer them honestly. Tell him you've taken on a partner who manages books and horses. If he's worked for you 8 years like you said, he'll figure out the rest and either respect it or not. Silas turned this over in his mind, looking for the trap, the hidden cost, the inevitable disappointment. But Eliza just sat there, calm and direct, offering him something no one else ever had, the chance to be exactly himself alongside someone doing the same. When could you start? He heard himself say. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but a softening. I paid through the end of the week. Give me 3 days to settle my bill and pack my things. I'll ride out to the Double G on Thursday morning. I'll have Tom prepare the guest room. The bunkhouse would be fine. You're not a ranch hand. I'm not a society lady either. The guest room, Silas said firmly. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. You'll have your own space, your own privacy, but you'll take meals at the main house, work from the ranch office, and have full access to the books and operations. Eliza stood and extended her hand. 3 days, then. He shook it. Her grip was firm, calloused, honest. When he let go, he felt like he'd signed something more binding than any legal document, a pact made on honor and exhaustion and the quiet desperation of two people tired of pretending. Mr. Granger, she said as he reached the door. Yes? Thank you for taking a chance on something that doesn't make sense to anyone but us. He almost smiled. Thank you for offering it. The ride back to the ranch felt shorter, though the snow hadn't improved. Silas let his horse set the pace and thought about what he'd just agreed to. Partnership without romance, companionship without pretense, a woman who'd look at his empire and see work instead of wealth. It was possibly the stupidest decision he'd ever made. It was also possibly the bravest. When he got back to the ranch, Tom was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, expression knowing. Well? Guest room, get it ready. Someone's moving in Thursday. Tom's eyebrows rose. The Hart woman? Her name is Eliza, and she's going to be helping with the books and operations. Helping with the... Tom stopped, studied Silas's face, then slowly nodded. I see. Do you? I think I do. You're taking on a partner. That's right. Not a wife. Not a wife. Tom was quiet for a moment. Boss, you know what people are going to say. I know exactly what they're going to say. They're going to say I finally hired a mistress because I was too proud to marry properly. They're going to call her a gold digger and me a hypocrite, and none of it will be true, but they'll say it anyway. And you're doing it regardless? I am. Then I'll get the room ready. Tom started toward the house, then paused. For what it's worth, boss, I met her yesterday. She's got honest eyes. More honest than half those society girls put together. I noticed. And if she can actually manage books like she says, well, you've been needing help with that end of things for 2 years. I have. So maybe this is smart instead of stupid. Or maybe it's both, Tom grinned. Wouldn't be the first time. That evening, Cookie cornered Silas in the barn. The old cook had been with the Double G since Silas's father's time, and he exercised the privileges of long service by saying exactly what he thought. Heard you brought home a woman. Heard fast, didn't you? Mrs. Mitchell's nephew works in the stables. He rode out here soon as you left town, told everyone you were up in that Hart woman's room for near 20 minutes. Cookie fixed him with a look. That true? It's true. You courting her? No. Then what are you doing? Silas set down the saddle he'd been oiling. I'm trying something different, Cookie. Trying to build a life that doesn't involve either loneliness or lies. If that bothers you, door's that way. Cookie snorted. After 25 years, you think I'm leaving over a woman? Hell, boy, I've been waiting for you to do something unpredictable. This ranch runs too smooth. Makes a man nervous. I'll try to provide more chaos for your entertainment. See that you do. Cookie headed back toward the cookhouse, then called over his shoulder. She as smart as people say? Smarter, probably. Good. Maybe she can teach you some manners. The 3 days before Eliza's arrival passed in a strange suspension. Silas found himself noticing things he'd stopped seeing, the way the guest room's wallpaper had faded, how the furniture was solid but graceless, that the curtains blocked light instead of filtering it. He had Tom order new linens from the mercantile, bought a desk from the carpenter, moved a comfortable reading chair from his own room. You're nesting, Tom observed, watching Silas adjust the desk's position for the 3rd time. I'm preparing appropriate workspace for a business partner. Right, that's why you bought flowers for the nightstand. Those were Cookie's idea. Cookie said you ordered them special from the greenhouse. Silas straightened. Are you managing this ranch or critiquing my furniture arrangements? Can I do both? Tom grinned. Relax, boss. I'm just saying it's nice to see you care about something besides cattle and ledgers. But caring was dangerous territory, and Silas knew it. He'd agreed to partnership, not emotional investment. The room preparations were practical, nothing more. A comfortable workspace led to better productivity. That was business sense, not sentimentality. He almost convinced himself. Thursday morning arrived clear and cold. Silas stood on the porch at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the road. He told himself he was just enjoying the sunrise, that the tightness in his chest was from the cold air, nothing more. She appeared around 9, riding the same tired sorrel, a bedroll and saddlebags her only luggage. No trunks of fancy dresses, no wagon full of hope chest belongings. Just a woman, a horse, and whatever she could carry. Silas walked down to meet her. Made it. I did. Eliza dismounted, and he saw she was wearing the same practical clothes from their first meeting, canvas coat, wool pants, scarred boots. This is everything I own. Hope that doesn't disappoint. Disappointed would be if you'd arrived with 3 trunks of ball gowns. She smiled slightly. Not much call for ball gowns in my line of work. Tom came around from the barn. Miss Hart, good to see you again. Tom, good to see you too. She handed him the sorrel's reins. He's had a hard few days. Could use some grain and a good rub-down. I'll see to it personally. Tom led the horse away, and Silas saw him glance back with something that might have been approval. Let me show you the house, Silas said. He took her through the grand entrance, the formal parlor, the dining room that seated 20. Watched her take it in without the acquisitive gleam he'd seen in so many eyes. She looked at the space the way a craftsman looked at good tools, appreciating quality, but already thinking about function. It's beautiful, she said. And lonely as hell. The honesty startled him. You noticed. Hard not to. This was designed for a family, for life and noise and people. Instead, it's a museum to what might have been. She turned to him. We could change that. How? By actually living in it instead of preserving it. By using the kitchen for cooking, the parlor for reading, the dining room for actual meals instead of showpieces. By making it a home instead of a monument. Silas felt something catch in his throat. The guest room's upstairs. I had it prepared. He led her up the grand staircase, down the hall to the room he'd spent 3 days getting ready. When he opened the door, Eliza stopped in the threshold. The afternoon light poured through new curtains, soft, filtering. The desk sat angled to catch it. Fresh flowers in a blue vase on the nightstand. Books on the shelf, ranch management, animal husbandry, territorial law. A quilt on the bed that had been his mother's, carefully stored and never used. Silas. Her voice was quiet. This is too much. It's what you'll need. Desk for the books, good light for reading, space to think. I meant the care you took. She walked to the desk, ran her fingers over the smooth wood. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. We're partners. Partners provide appropriate working conditions. She turned, and he saw something in her expression he couldn't quite read. Is that what this is? Working conditions? What else would it be? I don't know. Maybe hope that this arrangement might be something more than just business convenience. She sat on the bed, testing it. This quilt. It means something. It was my mother's. Then why give it to me? Silas hadn't planned to answer that honestly, but something about the way she looked at him, direct, unflinching, genuinely curious, pulled the truth out. Because it's been in storage for 20 years, and that feels like waste. Because my mother designed this house for family, and I've spent 2 decades turning it into a fortress. Because maybe... He stopped. Because maybe what? Because maybe I'm tired of keeping beautiful things locked away where they can't be used. The quilt. The house. The life I could have had if I'd been less afraid. Eliza stood and walked to him. Not too close. She respected boundaries, but close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. We're both afraid, she said. You're afraid of being not enough or too much. I'm afraid of being broken beyond repair. But maybe that's exactly why this could work. We understand what it costs to protect ourselves. We also understand what it costs to stay protected forever. What are you saying? I'm saying partnership is a starting point, not a destination. Where it goes from here, she shrugged. We'll figure it out as we go. No expectations, no pressure. Just 2 people being honest about who they are and what they need. Silas found himself nodding. I can work with that. Then let's start working. She unpinned her coat. Show me the books. Let me see what I'm dealing with. They spent the afternoon in his office. Eliza bent over ledgers while Silas explained the ranch's operations. She asked sharp questions, caught mistakes he'd missed, suggested reorganizations that made immediate sense. By evening, she'd restructured his entire accounting system and found 3 areas where they were losing money to inefficiency. You're good at this, he said. I'm better at this than most things. She closed the last ledger. Your operation is sound, but you're doing the work of 3 men. No wonder you're exhausted. I manage. You survive. There's a difference. She stood, stretched. Tomorrow I'll start going through the supply records. I bet we're overpaying on feed and getting charged for materials we never received. After that, I want to look at the breeding records. See if we can improve the bloodlines. Anything else? His tone was dry. Several things, but they can wait until I've been here more than 6 hours. She smiled. Where do I eat? With me, if that's acceptable. It's acceptable. They ate in the kitchen, cookies, beef stew, fresh bread, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Eliza tucked in without ceremony, eating like someone who'd missed too many meals to take them for granted. Silas found himself watching her, this woman who'd ridden into his life 3 days ago and was already rearranging it. You're staring, she said without looking up. I'm trying to figure out if this is real. What part? All of it. You. This arrangement. The fact that for the first time in 3 years, someone's sitting at this table who isn't being paid to be here. Eliza set down her spoon. I'm being paid. Room, board, and access to work that matters. That's payment. It's not the same as wages. No, it's better. Wages mean you're temporary. This means I'm invested. After dinner, she excused herself to unpack. Silas stood at the kitchen window and watched night settle over the ranch. In the bunkhouse, lanterns flickered. In the barn, horses shuffled. Everything the same as always, except now there was someone upstairs who'd called his house lonely and meant it as an observation, not an insult. He heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see her coming back down, changed into different clothes, but still practical, still herself. Couldn't sleep yet? Wanted to see the stars without glass in the way. She pulled on her coat. Walk with me? They went out into the cold, breath frosting, snow crunching under their boots. The sky stretched overhead, impossibly vast. Stars scattered like someone had spilled diamonds. Eliza tipped her head back and was silent for a long moment. I'd forgotten how big it is, she said finally. The sky. When you're working just to survive, you stop looking up. And now? Now I can look up again. She glanced at him. Thank you for that. I haven't done anything except offer you a room and access to ledgers. You offered me a chance to be something besides a cautionary tale. That's more than you know. They stood in the snow in silence, two people testing the edges of something neither quite understood. Partnership? Yes, but also possibility. The dangerous kind, the kind that made you wonder if maybe protecting yourself wasn't the same thing as living. Above them, the stars wheeled on, indifferent to human complications. And in that moment, standing beside a woman who'd offered him honesty instead of performance, Silas Granger felt the first crack in the ice he'd carried for 19 years. It was terrifying. It was also something very close to hope. The crack in the ice didn't heal, but it didn't widen either. It just sat there, a fault line running through the careful architecture Silas had built around himself, and he felt it every time Eliza walked into a room. She'd been at the Double G for 2 weeks when the first real test came. It started in the account books. Eliza had been systematically working through 3 years of supply records, and on a gray afternoon in early December, she appeared in the doorway of Silas's office with a ledger in one hand and an expression that made him set down his pen. We have a problem. How bad? Bad enough that I went over it 3 times to make sure I wasn't wrong. She came to his desk and opened the ledger, pointing to a series of entries. Look at these feed deliveries from Hastings Mill. Every month for the past 18 months. Same quantities, same prices. That's our contract with them. What's the problem? The problem is your actual inventory doesn't match what you've been billed for. According to this, you should have 6 tons more feed in storage than you actually do. Silas leaned forward, scanning the numbers. You're certain? I counted every bag in the storage barn twice. Either someone's stealing feed or Hastings Mill has been shorting your deliveries and charging you full price. The anger came hot and immediate, but Silas had learned long ago to let it cool before acting. He sat back, thinking. Hastings has been supplying this ranch for 5 years. Never had an issue before. When did you last personally verify the deliveries against the invoices? He didn't answer because they both knew. He'd hired a bookkeeper 2 years ago who'd quit after 6 months, and since then Silas had been too busy with the actual ranching to audit every delivery. He'd trusted the system and someone had taken advantage. We ride to Hastings Mill tomorrow, he said. You, me, and these ledgers. Time to have a conversation about honest business practices. But Eliza shook her head. Not yet. If we go in angry and accusing, they'll just deny it. We need proof beyond the numbers. Someone who will confirm they've been shorting deliveries. And how do we get that? We ask your men. Someone's been receiving these shipments. Someone knows whether the counts are accurate or not. They found Tom in the main barn, working on a stubborn gate hinge. When Silas explained the situation, the foreman's face went carefully neutral in a way that told Silas everything he needed to know. Tom, you know something. Might. Then tell me. Tom set down his tools and wiped his hands on his pants. It's been going on about a year, maybe longer. The Hastings boy who makes the deliveries, young kid, can't be more than 17. He started coming up short. At first it was just a bag or two, easy to miss. But then it got worse. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, twice. You were dealing with that property dispute with the Carver Ranch and those society daughters your mother's friends kept sending. You told me to handle it myself, so I did. Started checking every delivery personally, making the kid wait while I counted. He'd get nervous, make excuses, said his father was having him blend the loads to make the counts work out across multiple customers. Silas felt cold settle in his gut. His father. George Hastings is shorting me deliberately. Looks that way. And before you ask why I didn't push harder, boss, I'll tell you, I figured you'd handle it when you had time. Didn't realize it had been going on long enough to add up to 6 tons. Eliza spoke up. It's not Tom's fault. A good thief makes the loss gradual enough that nobody notices. 6 tons over 18 months is only 20 pounds per delivery. Easy to chalk up to moisture loss or measurement error. Except it's theft. Silas's voice was flat. And George Hastings knows exactly what he's doing. He's counting on me being too busy or too proud to verify every shipment personally. So what do we do? Tom asked. Eliza answered before Silas could. We set a trap. Next delivery is scheduled for Friday, according to the ledger. When the Hastings boy arrives, we check the count together, all of us in front of him. If it's short, we document it. Then we take that documentation to George and give him one chance to make it right before we involve the territorial marshal. Silas looked at her. You've done this before. My husband wasn't the only one who stole from people. I learned how to spot it and prove it. She met his eyes. Trust me on this. And he realized he did. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, between the ledger work and the quiet dinners and the way she'd reorganized his entire operation without asking permission, he'd started trusting her judgment as much as his own. Friday, then, he said. We do this your way. The next 2 days crawled past. Silas tried to focus on regular ranch work, but his mind kept circling back to George Hastings and the fundamental betrayal of it. He'd done business with the man for 5 years, paid every invoice on time, recommended Hastings' mill to other ranchers. And all along, George had been bleeding him slowly, counting on Silas's distraction to hide the theft. It burned worse than Rebecca's rejection had. At least she'd been honest about choosing security over love. George had looked him in the eye, shaken his hand, and robbed him with a smile. Thursday evening, Eliza found him standing at his office window, staring out at nothing. You're brooding. I'm thinking. Same thing with you. She came to stand beside him. What specifically are you thinking about? About how I built this ranch on the assumption that honest work deserved honest dealing. About how naive that makes me. It doesn't make you naive, it makes you decent. There's a difference. Decent people get stolen from. And then they handle it, which is what we're doing tomorrow. She was quiet for a moment. You want to know what I think the real problem is? Tell me. You're not angry about the money. You're angry that George Hastings looked at you and saw a mark instead of a man. That he assumed you were too distracted by your own loneliness to notice what he was doing. Silas turned to her. How do you know that? Because it's the same thing my husband's family did to me. Looked at the widow with nowhere to go and figured they could squeeze me for every penny he'd left. Told me I owed them for the shame of his drinking, for the embarrassment of his death. And I was so beaten down I almost believed them. Her jaw tightened. Then one morning I woke up and decided I was done letting people profit from my pain. I've been fighting that fight ever since. How'd it turn out with the family? I documented every debt they claimed, every payment I'd already made, every lie they told. Then I went to the minister and laid it all out. He gave them one Sunday to make it right, or he'd announce it from the pulpit. They backed down. She smiled grimly. Thieves hate public accountability. So tomorrow we make George Hastings publicly accountable. Tomorrow we give him the chance to do right. If he takes it, we move forward. If he doesn't, we make sure every rancher in 3 counties knows what kind of man they're dealing with. Friday morning came cold and clear. The Hastings mill wagon rolled up to the barn just after 9, pulled by a team that looked better fed than they should be if business was actually struggling. The driver was a kid, just like Tom had said, gangly, nervous, with his father's eyes but not yet his father's confidence and dishonesty. Silas, Tom, and Eliza were waiting. Mr. Granger. The kid's voice cracked slightly. Got your monthly delivery? Good. Let's count it together. Silas's tone was pleasant, but the kid went pale anyway. That's not... usually we just unload and... Usually, today we count. Silas gestured to the wagon bed. Go ahead and start bringing it down. Tom, you and I will stack. Eliza will tally. They worked in silence. The only sounds the thud of feed bags hitting the ground and Eliza's steady count. When the last bag came off, she checked her tally against the invoice and looked up. You're short, 200 pounds. The kid started to sweat despite the cold. That can't be right. I loaded this myself. Father said... What did your father say? Eliza's voice was gentle, but her eyes were steel. He said... The kid stopped, swallowed hard. He said the counts always work out. Not this time. Silas kept his voice level. This is the 4th short delivery in a row. Before that, it was every other shipment. I've got 18 months of documentation showing systematic theft. I didn't know! The protest came out desperate. I just load what Father tells me to load. I'm not... Easy. Tom put a hand on the kid's shoulder. Nobody's saying you're part of it, but we need to talk to your father. Now. They rode back to town in a grim procession, the Hastings boy driving the wagon, Silas and Eliza following on horseback with the ledgers. Tom stayed at the ranch, but his parting words echoed in Silas's head. Don't do anything that'll get you arrested. Revenge ain't worth a jail cell. Hastings Mill sat on the edge of Bitterroot Springs, a sprawling operation that supplied half the territory. George Hastings stood in the yard talking to another customer when his son drove up with Silas and Eliza behind him. The look on George's face when he saw them was everything Silas needed to confirm guilt. Silas, didn't expect to see you in town today. The greeting was too hearty, too fast. Something wrong with the delivery? You could say that. Silas dismounted and pulled the ledger from his saddlebag. We need to talk, private. George's eyes flicked to his son, who wouldn't meet his gaze, then back to Silas. Of course. Let's step into my office. The office smelled of sawdust and old coffee. George settled behind his desk with false confidence, while Silas remained standing. Eliza positioned herself by the door, ledger in hand, silent but present. Now then, George said, what seems to be the problem? Silas placed his own ledger on the desk. For 18 months, you've been shorting my feed deliveries. Small amounts at first, but it's added up to 6 tons of product I paid for and never received. That's theft, George. Plain and simple. That's a serious accusation. But George's voice had lost its bluster. It's a documented fact. Eliza stepped forward and opened her ledger. Every delivery, every shortage, cross-referenced with actual inventory counts. Your son confirmed today's shipment was 200 pounds short. We have 4 witnesses, Mr. Granger, myself, Tom Hendricks, and your own boy. George's face went red. My son doesn't know what he's... Don't! Silas's voice cracked like a whip. Don't make this worse by calling your own son a liar. You've been stealing from me and we both know it. The only question now is what you're going to do about it. The silence stretched. Through the office window, Silas could see townspeople going about their business, unaware of the confrontation happening inside. George Hastings sat behind his desk, and Silas watched him calculate the cost of admission against the cost of defiance, his reputation against his pride. It wasn't personal, George said finally. Business has been hard. Railroad's bringing in cheaper feed from the east, and I've got contracts I can't break without losing everything. You needed to steal from people who trusted you? Eliza's voice was quiet but cutting. You needed to balance your failures on someone else's back? That's not business, Mr. Hastings. That's cowardice. George flinched. What do you want? Money? I don't have 6 tons worth of cash on hand. Silas pulled out a chair and sat down. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to make full restitution, either in product or cash payments over the next 6 months. You're going to adjust my account to reflect what you actually delivered versus what you charged. And you're going to write a letter to every customer you supply, explaining that you've had inventory discrepancies and offering them the chance to audit their accounts. That'll ruin me. That'll give you a chance to make things right before I go to the marshal. Because, George, if you don't take this deal, I will involve the law. I will make sure every rancher from here to Helena knows what you did. And you won't just lose your business, you'll lose your liberty. Theft of this magnitude is prison time. George looked between them, trapped. And if I agree to your terms? Then we settle this between us. Your reputation takes a hit, but you keep your freedom and the chance to rebuild honestly. We stay silent about the specifics, and you get 6 months to prove you can run a legitimate operation. Why would you give me that option? Silas glanced at Eliza, then back to George. Because someone recently taught me that people deserve the chance to do right, even after they've done wrong. But this is your only chance, George. You steal from me or anyone else again, and there won't be another conversation, just consequences. George Hastings aged 10 years in the silence that followed. Finally, he nodded. 6 months. Full restitution. And the letters to my customers. Starting today. They drew up the agreement right there, Eliza's precise handwriting turning their conversation into legal obligation. George signed it with a shaking hand, and Silas felt no satisfaction in the victory, just tired awareness that trust, once broken, was harder to rebuild than anything else. On the ride back to the ranch, Eliza was quiet. Silas let the silence hold until they were out of town, then spoke. You think I was too soft on him? No, I think you were smarter than I expected. How so? You could have destroyed him, had him arrested, ruined, broken. Instead, you gave him a path to redemption. That takes more strength than revenge. My foreman said revenge wasn't worth a jail cell. Your foreman is wise, but this wasn't about revenge or jail. This was about you choosing what kind of man you want to be, the kind who uses power to crush or the kind who uses it to correct. She looked at him. You chose correction. That matters. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horse's breath frosting in the cold air. Silas found himself thinking about the crack in his ice, about how Eliza's presence had widened it just enough to let him see things differently. A month ago, he would have wanted George Hastings destroyed. Today, he'd settled for accountability and the chance at restoration. You changed something in me, he said. What's that? The way I see other people's failures. Used to be, someone betrayed my trust, they were dead to me. Finished. But watching you with George, the way you laid out the facts without cruelty, gave him room to choose, it made me realize maybe I've been carrying my own betrayals too close. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. You mean Rebecca? I mean all of it. Rebecca, yes. But also every society daughter I judged before she spoke. Every father I dismissed as a schemer. I've been so busy protecting myself from being hurt again that I stopped seeing people as people, started seeing them as threats or opportunities, nothing in between. And now? Now I'm trying to learn the difference between wisdom and wounds, between protecting yourself and closing yourself off. He looked at her. You're teaching me that, whether you meant to or not. She smiled slightly. I did mean to. That's what partnership is, teaching each other to be better than we are alone. Back at the ranch, Tom was waiting on the porch. One look at their faces told him enough. How bad? Could have been worse, Silas said, dismounting. He's making restitution. 6 months of payments and product. We got it in writing. Tom nodded slowly. And you didn't kill him or get arrested, so I'd call that a win. Small victories, Eliza said, handing her reins to one of the hands who'd appeared to help. I'm going to update the ledgers to reflect the new arrangement. Tom, can you make sure we document every delivery from Hastings going forward? We'll be verifying counts personally for the foreseeable future. Already planned on it, ma'am. She headed inside, and Tom watched her go with an expression Silas couldn't quite read. What? Nothing, just thinking that woman's the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. She's been here 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks, she's caught a thief, reorganized your entire operation, and somehow got you to smile more than once a day. Like I said, best thing in years. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window and watched moonlight silver the snow, thinking about the day and what it meant. He'd confronted betrayal and chosen restoration over revenge. He'd trusted Eliza's judgment and been proven right. He'd felt the edges of his carefully constructed isolation shift and hadn't immediately tried to shore them up. Small changes, maybe, but changes nonetheless. A knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Silas?" Eliza's voice, quiet. "You awake?" He opened the door. She stood in the hallway in her nightdress and robe, hair loose around her shoulders, holding a book. "Can't sleep either?" "Thought maybe you'd want company, or if you don't, I'll just go back." "Stay." The word came easier than it should have. "I was just thinking. Dangerous occupation." She came in and settled in the chair by the window, drawing her robe close. "What about?" "About how much has changed since you rode up to my gate 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? Feels longer. Does it feel right? The question was more vulnerable than he intended. This arrangement, this partnership, does it feel like what you hoped for? Eliza considered him for a long moment. It feels like more than I hoped for. I thought I was coming here for work and safety, a place to be useful without pretending to be something I'm not. But what I found was harder and better than that. Better how? You see me, Silas, really see me. Not the widow, not the damaged woman, not the cautionary tale. You see someone capable and smart and worth trusting with real responsibility. Do you know how rare that is? You are capable and smart and worth trusting. I know that now, but I'd forgotten it until I came here. She looked down at the book in her hands. I spent years being told I was broken, that my judgment was flawed, that my presence brought bad luck, that I'd be alone because no decent man would want damaged goods. I believed it for so long I stopped questioning whether it was true. And now? Now I'm remembering who I was before the breaking. The girl who could manage a farm's accounts at 16, who trained horses better than grown men, who read law books for fun and knew exactly what she was worth. She met his eyes. You gave me space to remember that. And I'm grateful. Silas sat on the edge of his bed, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. The two of them in nightclothes, speaking truths in the dark. It should have felt wrong, scandalous. Instead, it felt like the most honest thing he'd done in years. "You want to know what you gave me?" he said. "Tell me." "A reason to stop being right all the time. For 19 years, I've been proving that I don't need anyone, that I'm enough on my own. And I was right. I built an empire by myself. But being right just made me lonely. You showed me there's another way. That needing someone doesn't mean you're not enough. It means you're human." Eliza smiled. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The woman who forgot she was capable and the man who forgot he was human." "Quite a pair," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow begin to fall outside the window. Silas felt the moment stretch and settle, awareness growing between them that this quiet sharing of darkness and truth, was more intimate than anything either had allowed themselves in years. "I should go," Eliza said finally, but she didn't move. "You should," Silas agreed, but he didn't want her to. She stood, book still in hand, and paused at the door. "Silas?" "Yes?" "Thank you for today, for letting me help, for trusting my judgment, for being the kind of man who chooses accountability over anger. Thank you for seeing that choice in me before I saw it myself." After she left, Silas lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling the crack in his ice widen just a little more. Partnership, they'd called it. A practical arrangement between two damaged people looking for honest companionship. But lying there in the dark, listening to Eliza's footsteps retreat down the hall, Silas had to admit the truth he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. This felt like more than partnership. It felt dangerously close to healing. And healing required something he'd sworn off 19 years ago, the willingness to be vulnerable enough to let someone matter. The snow fell heavier outside, blanketing the ranch in white silence. And somewhere in that silence, between the heartbeats and the doubts, Silas Granger made a choice. He'd let her matter. Whatever came next, he'd face it honestly instead of hiding behind the walls he'd built. It was the most terrifying decision he'd made since the day he'd asked Rebecca Marsh to marry him. But this time felt different. This time, he wasn't alone. The decision to let her matter didn't come with instructions, and Silas found himself navigating unfamiliar territory with nothing but instinct and the growing certainty that whatever was happening between them deserved honesty. December deepened into the kind of cold that made breath freeze and leather crack. The ranch work continued. Cattle needed feeding regardless of temperature. Fences needed mending even when the wire burned fingers through gloves. But something had shifted in the rhythm of it. Eliza worked alongside the men now, not as hired help, but as someone who belonged. She could read a sick cow as well as Tom, negotiate with suppliers better than Silas himself, and had reorganized the breeding records so efficiently that they'd already identified 3 bloodline improvements for spring. The hands accepted her with the pragmatic ease of men who valued competence over convention. Cookie started asking her opinion on menu planning. Tom deferred to her judgment on supply orders. And Silas found himself watching her move through his world and thinking how much lighter it felt with her in it. 4 weeks after her arrival, the town finally forced the issue neither of them had been ready to address. It was a Saturday, and they'd ridden into Bitterroot Springs together for supplies. A practical trip, nothing more, flour and coffee and lamp oil, the mundane necessities of ranch life. But the moment they walked down Main Street side by side, Silas felt the weight of attention shift toward them like a physical thing. The mercantile went quiet when they entered. Mrs. Patterson, the shopkeeper's wife, looked up from the counter, and her smile curdled into something between disapproval and fascination. "Mr. Granger, Miss Hart." The greeting was ice-wrapped in politeness. "Shopping together, I see." "We live on the same ranch," Eliza said evenly. "Seemed efficient." "I'm sure it does." Mrs. Patterson's gaze raked over Eliza with the kind of assessment women used on each other when measuring moral failings. "Though I must say, the talk in town has been quite active regarding your living arrangement." Silas felt his jaw tighten. The talk in town can mind its own business. When unmarried persons cohabitate, Mr. Granger, it becomes everyone's business. The moral fabric of our community. The moral fabric of your community had no problem with George Hastings stealing from his customers for 18 months, Eliza interrupted, her voice pleasant but sharp. But a woman working as a ranch manager somehow threatens civilization? That's fascinating mathematics. Mrs. Patterson's face went red. "How dare you?" "She dares because she's right." Silas put his hand on the small of Eliza's back, a gesture of solidarity that wouldn't be missed by anyone watching. "Now either sell us what we came for, or we'll take our business to the general store. Your choice." They got their supplies in hostile silence and left. On the boardwalk outside, Eliza stopped and turned to him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. She had no right. She had every right to her opinions. She just doesn't have the right to make them our problem." Eliza's expression was complicated. "But you touching me like that, defending me in public, Silas, that's going to make the talk worse, not better. I don't care about the talk. You should, because it's not just your reputation anymore. It's mine too. And I've lived through being the subject of town gossip once already. I know how ugly it gets." They walked toward the horses in silence. Across the street, Sadie Mitchell stood on her boarding house porch, watching them with the avid attention of someone already composing her next round of judgment. Further down, a cluster of ranch wives whispered behind gloved hands. Silas helped Eliza mount, aware of eyes tracking every movement, every moment of casual familiarity between them. When he swung into his own saddle, she was looking at him with something that might have been concern or might have been resignation. "We need to talk," she said. "Really talk. About what this is, and what people think it is, and whether we're ready for the consequences of the difference." "Not here." "No, not here." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but not the comfortable silence they'd developed over the past weeks. This was weighted, expectant, like the air before a storm. By the time they reached the house, Silas felt the pressure of unspoken things building between them. They stabled the horses without speaking, carried supplies to the kitchen without meeting each other's eyes. Cookie took one look at them and found urgent business elsewhere. Tom, with the wisdom of long experience, made himself scarce. Eliza stood at the kitchen window, arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth from the stove. Silas poured coffee neither of them wanted and tried to find words for the conversation they'd been avoiding. "I'm making this harder for you," he said finally. "Being seen with you, defending you publicly. I'm attaching my reputation to yours, and that's not what I'm worried about." She turned to face him. "I told you from the start I didn't care what people thought." I've been called worse than whatever Sadie Mitchell dreams up. But Silas, the way you touched me in the mercantile, the way you looked at me, that wasn't partnership. That was something else. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. And if it was, then we need to be honest about it. Because we started this as a practical arrangement between two people too damaged for romance. No expectations, no pretense. But somewhere between the ledgers and the late-night conversations, something changed, and we both know it. Silas set down his coffee. When did you know? The night you gave me your mother's quilt. I told myself it was just a generous gesture, but the way you looked when you explained it, that wasn't generosity. That was vulnerability. You were offering me something precious and hoping I'd understand what it meant. She paused. When did you know? The night after we confronted George Hastings. You came to my room and we talked in the dark, and I realized I'd been happier in those 30 minutes than I'd been in 19 years. That's when I knew this had stopped being about practical partnership and started being about something I didn't have a name for. And now? Now I still don't have a name for it, but I know I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I know I find excuses to work near wherever you're working. I know when you laugh at something Cookie says, it's the best sound in the world. And I know... He stopped, swallowed hard. I know I'm terrified of what that means. Eliza crossed to him slowly, stopping close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, the small scar on her chin from some long-ago accident. I'm terrified too, she said quietly, because I swore I'd never let another man have power over my happiness. I swore I'd never need anyone enough to be destroyed by losing them. And here I am, needing you in ways that break every promise I made to myself. What do we do? I don't know. The safe thing would be to step back, reestablish boundaries. Remember, this was supposed to be practical. She reached up and touched his face, gentle fingers against rough beard. But I don't think I can do the safe thing anymore, not with you. Silas caught her hand, held it against his cheek. I failed at love once. Failed so completely that I spent half my life building walls to make sure it couldn't happen again. I don't know if I remember how to do this. How to let someone matter without waiting for them to leave. I don't know either. My only experience with marriage was with a man who taught me that love curdles when tested. That partnership becomes prison when people stop being honest. She turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. But maybe that's exactly why this could work. We both know what failure looks like. We both know the cost of pretending. Maybe that means we can build something different, something honest, even when it's hard. You're saying we try, knowing how badly we could fail. I'm saying we acknowledge what's already happening instead of pretending we can control it. I'm saying we stop hiding from whatever this is and face it together. Her smile was small but real. We were honest about everything else. Seems foolish to start lying now. Silas pulled her closer, slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. She came into his arms like she belonged there, and when he held her, something in his chest unlocked that had been bound tight for 19 years. I don't have pretty words, he said against her hair. I don't know how to court someone or make grand gestures. All I know is ranch work and ledgers and the kind of practical honesty that doesn't leave room for romance. Good. Because I don't want pretty words or grand gestures. I just want this, you, me, honest about what we feel even when it's terrifying. That's enough. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the coffee went cold, and the afternoon light shifted gold across the floor. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was just two people choosing to stop running from the truth of what they'd become to each other. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza's eyes were bright. So what do we tell people when they ask what we are to each other? The truth. That you're my partner in every sense that matters. That we share a life and a home, and we're not apologizing for doing it our way instead of theirs. Let them assume we know the truth. That's enough. But the truth was more complicated than either wanted to admit, and it showed itself 3 days later when Silas came back from checking fence line to find Eliza in his office, staring at a letter with an expression that made his blood run cold. What happened? She looked up, and he saw tears she was refusing to let fall. My husband's brother. He found out where I am. Silas took the letter. The handwriting was crude, the words cruder. You think you can run forever? You think that rich rancher wants damaged goods? You still owe us for the shame Thomas brought on this family. $300, or we tell everyone what kind of woman you really are. You got 2 weeks. The rage came instant and absolute. Silas read it twice to make sure he understood, then looked at Eliza. This is extortion. This is my past catching up. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. I told you Thomas's family tried to squeeze me for money. They blamed me for his drinking, said I drove him to it. When I left, they said I owed them restitution for the debts he'd left behind. Debts he incurred, not you. Doesn't matter to them. They see a woman with no protection and a rich man willing to take her in. They think they can bleed me for whatever they can get. Silas sat down across from her. How much did you actually owe them? Nothing. Thomas's debts died with him. I had the minister confirm it. But they kept coming after me anyway, showing up at jobs, telling employers I was a thief. That's why I kept moving. Every time I'd get settled, they'd find me and start the pressure again. Not this time. Silas, you can't watch me. He stood, already planning. Where are they? Last I heard, Butte. But Samuel, the brother, he moves around, works mines when he can find work, drinks when he can't. Then we'll find him in Butte, and we'll settle this permanently. Eliza stood too, put her hand on his arm. These aren't reasonable men. Samuel's mean when he's sober and vicious when he's drunk. If you confront him, it could get violent. I'm counting on it. That's not... She stopped, closed her eyes. You're trying to protect me, and I appreciate it. I do. But this is my fight, Silas. I've been fighting it alone for 3 years. I can't let you... You're not alone anymore. He turned to face her fully. That's what this means, what we decided 3 days ago. It means your fights are my fights. Your past is part of our present, and I'll be damned if I let some drunk bully terrorize the woman I... He stopped. The word hung between them, unspoken but present. Eliza's eyes widened. The woman you what? The woman I care about, deeply. More than is probably wise considering we've known each other 5 weeks. But there it is, He touched her face. I care about you, Eliza. And I protect what I care about. She leaned into his touch. If we go to Butte, if we confront Samuel, it could turn ugly fast. He's got friends, other men like him. They won't respond to reason or legal threats. Then what will they respond to? She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Money, maybe. If we offered to pay a smaller amount, say $50, as final settlement, he might take it. Men like Samuel don't plan ahead. Fast money looks better than waiting for a bigger payday. You want to pay them? I want to end this. And sometimes the fastest way to end a fight is to make it unprofitable to continue. She picked up the letter again. But we do it on our terms, in public, with witnesses. We make it clear this is the only payment, that any future contact will involve the marshal. Silas thought about this. His instinct was to ride to Butte and beat some respect into Samuel with his fists. But Eliza's approach was smarter, public, documented, final. The kind of solution that closed doors instead of just slamming them. We go tomorrow, he said. You, me, and Tom. We find Samuel in whatever bar he's drinking in. We make the offer with witnesses present, and we get it in writing that this settles all claims. And if he refuses, then we involve the law and make his life uncomfortable enough that extortion stops being worth the effort. That night, Silas found himself back at his bedroom window, watching stars wheel overhead and thinking about the strangeness of caring for someone. For 19 years, he'd convinced himself that not caring was strength, that keeping everyone at arm's length meant he controlled his own fate. But standing there thinking about Eliza's tears and Samuel's threats, he realized the truth. Not caring hadn't made him strong. It had just made him alone. Caring was the risk. Caring meant someone could hurt you, but it also meant you had something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. The door opened quietly behind him. He knew without turning it was her. Can't sleep? Too much thinking. She came to stand beside him. You didn't have to offer to help, you know. This isn't your mess. It is now. Because we're partners? Because you matter to me. He said it plainly, without decoration. And when someone matters, Their battles become yours. That's what I'm learning anyway. Eliza leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that, two people learning how to be more than alone, and let the silence hold them. I'm scared, she admitted finally. Not of Samuel. I stopped being scared of him a long time ago, but of this, of mattering to you and you mattering to me, of building something that could break. Everything breaks eventually. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's just truth. He turned her to face him. But here's the other truth. I'd rather have something that could break than keep living in a house too empty to damage. I'd rather risk this with you than be safe and alone. She kissed him then, soft and sudden, and Silas felt the last of his walls crack open. Not the careful kiss of testing, but the honest kiss of someone choosing risk over safety, vulnerability over protection. When they pulled apart, she was crying. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. She wiped her eyes. I didn't think I'd feel this again. Hope. The kind that hurts because you want it so badly. I know exactly what you mean. They stood in his room, in the dark, holding each other like lifelines. And somewhere in that holding, between the heartbeats and the hope, they made a silent pact. They'd face Samuel together. They'd face the town gossip together. They'd face whatever came next together, honestly, without pretending it was easy or safe or anything except what it was. Two damaged people learning that maybe damage didn't mean broken beyond repair. Maybe it just meant you knew where the cracks were, and you could choose to fill them or let light through. They chose light. The ride to Butte took most of the next day. They left at dawn, Silas, Eliza, and Tom, following the territorial road through country that got rougher as they traveled. Butte sprawled in a valley like a wound, smoke from the smelters turning the sky gray, the whole city smelling of copper and desperation. Cheerful place, Tom observed. Mining towns never are, Eliza said. But Samuel fits right in. Men who work themselves to death underground tend to drink themselves to death above it. They found him in the third saloon they tried, a dingy establishment called the Copper Queen that catered to miners at shift change. Samuel was exactly what Silas expected, mid-30s, hard-faced, with the wiry build of someone who'd done physical labor his whole life. He sat at a corner table with two other men, cards and empty glasses scattered between them. When Eliza walked in, his face lit with ugly satisfaction. Well, well, little Eliza, come to pay up? Come to settle this once and for all. Her voice was steady. You, me, and a written agreement. That's the offer. Samuel looked past her to Silas and Tom. Brought your new man, did you, hoping his money will buy you out of what you owe? I don't owe you anything, Samuel. Your brother's debts died with him, and you know it. But I'm willing to pay $50 for you to sign a document saying this is settled, that you'll never contact me again, never show up at my workplace, never send threatening letters. $50? Samuel laughed. I said $300, and I'm offering $50. Take it or we walk, and I file extortion charges with the territorial marshal. She pulled out a prepared document. I've got the letter you sent. Got witnesses who'll testify to your harassment. You can take $50 now and walk away clean, or you can push this and end up explaining to a judge why you're threatening a woman for debts that don't exist. Samuel's face darkened. You little... Silas stepped forward. Watch your mouth. The lady made you a fair offer. You'd be smart to take it. And who the hell are you? Someone with a lot more patience than sense, apparently, but my patience has limits. Silas's voice dropped to the register that made smart men reconsider. Sign the paper, take the money, disappear from her life, or find out what happens when you threaten someone under my protection. Samuel looked between them, calculating. His friend shifted uneasily. They wanted no part of whatever was building here. Finally, Samuel spat on the floor and held out his hand. Let's see this paper. Eliza handed it over. Samuel read it slowly, lips moving, then looked up. This says I can never contact you again for any reason. That's right. What if I just want to write, let you know how the family's doing? The family that blamed me for Thomas's death? The family that called me a curse and said I drove your brother to drink? That family? Eliza's voice was ice. I don't want updates, Samuel. I want you gone from my life permanently. He stared at her, and Silas saw the moment the bully realized he'd lost. Samuel wasn't getting $300. He wasn't getting continued power over Eliza's peace. He was getting $50 and permanent banishment, and fighting it would cost more than it was worth. Fine. He scrawled his name on the document. Give me the money. Silas counted out $50 in coins and bills, made sure the bartender and two other patrons witnessed the exchange. When it was done, Eliza folded the signed document carefully and put it in her coat. You're dead to me now, Samuel. Same as Thomas. Don't test whether I mean it. They walked out into the gray afternoon, and Silas saw Eliza's hand shaking as she mounted her horse. But her face was set, determined, and when she looked at him, there was something like triumph in her eyes. It's over. It's over, he agreed. They rode out of Butte at a steady pace, Tom keeping tactful silence while Silas and Eliza processed what had just happened. When they were clear of the city, Eliza finally spoke. Thank you for backing me, for not taking over, not making it about your pride, for letting it be my fight but standing with me anyway. That's what partners do. Is that what we are? Still just partners? Silas looked at her. This woman who'd ridden into his life 5 weeks ago offering honesty instead of romance, who'd reorganized his world and cracked open his heart, who just faced down her past with more courage than most men could muster. No, he said. We stopped being just partners somewhere between the ledgers and the late-night conversations, somewhere between your honesty and my walls coming down. I don't know what the word is for what we are now, but it's more than partnership. Then what do we call it? The truth, Tom interjected from behind them. You call it the truth and stop dancing around it. Any fool with eyes can see you two are in love. Question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. The silence that followed was absolute. Silas looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at Silas. And slowly, hesitantly, they both started to smile. Are we? Eliza asked. I think we might be, Silas answered. That's terrifying. Completely terrifying. And probably stupid. Almost certainly stupid. But true? Silas reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. Yeah, true. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, hands clasped, hearts open, two people who'd sworn off love learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong about what you needed. The double G appeared on the horizon as the sun set, painting the snow pink and gold. And riding toward it, Silas felt something he hadn't allowed himself in 19 years. He felt like he was coming home to something more than an empty house. He was coming home to someone who mattered, and she was riding right beside him. Coming home to someone who mattered changed everything and nothing at the same time. The ranch work continued as it always had. Cattle still needed tending, books still needed balancing, fences still broke in the cold. But now when Silas walked into the kitchen for breakfast, Eliza was there with coffee already poured. When he worked late in his office, she'd appear with food and sit quietly doing her own paperwork until he was ready to stop. And at night, instead of standing alone at his window watching the stars, he'd find her in the parlor reading, and they'd sit together in comfortable silence until the fire burned low. It was domestic in a way that should have felt suffocating, but instead felt like breathing. 2 weeks after Butte, Cookie cornered Silas in the barn with the kind of determination that meant he had something to say and wouldn't be deterred. You planning to marry that woman or just keep living in sin till the town decides to run you both out? Silas looked up from the saddle he was mending. That's direct, even for you. I'm old. I don't have time for dancing around topics. Cookie crossed his arms. That girl's good for you. Best thing that's happened to this ranch in 20 years. But she deserves better than being your permanent house guest while people whisper about what you're doing behind closed doors. We're not doing anything behind closed doors, Cookie snorted. That's the problem. You two tiptoe around each other like you're afraid touching might cause an avalanche, but everyone in town thinks you're betting her anyway, so you might as well get the benefits of the reputation you've already got. This isn't about benefits, it's about… Silas stopped, searching for words. It's complicated. Love usually is, but complications don't get simpler by ignoring them. Cookie's expression softened. Look, boss, I watched you build this empire. Watched you turn down every woman who came calling because you were too proud or too scared or too convinced you didn't need anyone. Then Miss Eliza shows up and suddenly you're smiling again. You're actually living in that big house instead of just storing yourself there between work shifts. You want to know what I think? I suspect you're going to tell me regardless. I think you're afraid that if you ask her to marry you, she'll see it as you trying to make her respectable instead of choosing her because you love her. And I think she's afraid that if you don't ask, it means you're ashamed of what you have together. So you're both stuck in this halfway place, calling it partnership when anyone with eyes can see it's more. Silas set down the saddle. When did you get so wise about relationships? I've been married 43 years. You learn a few things. Cookie headed toward the door, then paused. My Martha used to say the worst thing you can do to love is treat it like something you have to earn instead of something you choose. Think about it. That night, Silas did think about it. He stood at his bedroom window, a habit he couldn't seem to break, and wondered if Cookie was right. He and Eliza had fallen into a comfortable pattern, but was comfort the same as commitment? They'd acknowledged loving each other on the ride back from Butte, but they'd never talked about what that meant beyond shared work and honest companionship. Marriage. The word felt heavy with history, his mother's dreams, Rebecca's rejection, all those society daughters he'd turned away. But when he thought about marrying Eliza, it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt like the natural next step in a journey they'd already started. It also felt terrifying. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Eliza, in her nightdress and robe, holding 2 cups of tea. Saw your light on. Thought you might want company. Always. He took one of the cups and gestured to the chairs by the cold fireplace. Can't sleep? Too much thinking. She settled into her usual chair, tucking her feet under her. I've been here almost 2 months now. Feels like longer. In a good way? In the best way. I wake up every morning and spend about 10 seconds being surprised that this is my life now. That I have work that matters, a home that's actually home. Someone who... She paused. Someone who sees me as a person instead of a problem. Silas sat across from her. Is that how Thomas made you feel? Like a problem? Thomas made me feel like I was responsible for everything that went wrong and deserved credit for nothing that went right. When the farm failed, it was because I didn't support him enough. When he drank, it was because I'd made him miserable. Even when I'd worked 18-hour days to keep food on the table, somehow it was my fault we were struggling. She looked down at her tea. After a while, you start to believe it. Start to think maybe you are the problem. You know that's not true. I know it now. But it took leaving. Took 3 years of proving to myself that I could survive alone before I could even consider letting someone close again. She met his eyes. And then you came along with your empty house and your honest eyes. And somehow you made it safe to stop running. You made it safe for me to stop hiding, Silas said quietly. I've been behind walls so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be myself with another person. No performance, no protection, just truth. So what do we do with this truth now that we've found it? The question hung between them. Silas thought about Cookie's words, about Martha's wisdom, that love was a choice, not an achievement. He thought about the way Eliza looked in the morning light, competent and real and entirely herself. He thought about the fact that he wanted to wake up next to her for the rest of his life, and that wanting that didn't make him weak. It made him human. I think we stop calling this an arrangement and start calling it what it is, he said. Which is? A life we're building together. A partnership that became something more. A choice we keep making every day to be honest and present and willing to risk our hearts on each other. He set down his tea and went to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. I love you, Eliza, not because you're convenient or helpful or any of the practical reasons we started this. I love you because you're brave and smart and real, because you see me clearly and choose me anyway. Because when I think about the future, you're in every version of it that matters. Her eyes filled. Silas, let me finish. I know we said no expectations, no pressure, but I'm asking you to expect something now. To expect that I mean it when I say you matter. That this isn't temporary or conditional. That I want to build a real life with you, legally and officially, and in every way that makes it clear you're not my employee or my house guest or my scandalous arrangement. He took her hands. Marry me, Eliza. Not because the town gossips, not to make you respectable, but because I love you and I want to choose you every day for the rest of my life. She was crying now, tears sliding down her face. You're sure? Because I come with damage and history and a past that includes threats from drunk in-laws. I come with all the things that made me swear off marriage in the first place. And I come with walls and pride and 19 years of convincing myself I didn't need anyone. We're both damaged, Eliza. But maybe that's exactly why this works. We know what it costs to protect ourselves. We also know what it costs to stay protected forever. He wiped her tears with his thumb. So yes, I'm sure. Question is whether you are. She kissed him then, fierce and certain, and when she pulled back she was smiling through tears. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, not because it's practical or proper, but because I love you too much to pretend I don't. Because you make me brave enough to risk my heart again. She laughed shakily. Though we're going to scandalize the entire territory when we announce it. Let them be scandalized. We'll know the truth. They sat together in his room until the tea went cold and the stars wheeled overhead, making quiet plans for a future that had seemed impossible 2 months ago. They decided on a small ceremony, just the ranch hands and Cookie and maybe the minister if he'd agree to perform it. No society wedding, no performance, just 2 people making honest promises in front of witnesses who actually mattered. When? Eliza asked. Soon. I've waited 19 years to feel this way about someone. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary. 2 weeks, then. That gives us time to handle the legal paperwork, and for me to make a dress that doesn't look like I'm going to muck stalls after the ceremony. Silas smiled. You could wear work clothes for all I care. I just want you to be my wife. The next morning, they told Tom over breakfast. His reaction was a knowing smile and a simple, about damn time. You're not surprised? Eliza asked. Miss Eliza, I've been watching this man for 8 years. I know what he looks like when he's protecting an investment versus when he's protecting his heart. This, his heart, has been since Butte. I'm just glad you both finally admitted it. Cookie's response was equally unsurprised, but more vocal. He actually hugged Eliza, which embarrassed them both, and declared he'd make a wedding supper that would be talked about for years. The ranch hands took the news with the practical acceptance of men who'd watched the whole thing unfold. There was some money exchanged. Apparently there'd been betting on when Silas would finally propose, but overall the response was warm approval. She's good for you, boss, one of the younger hands said. Makes this place feel less like a business and more like a home. The town's response was less generous. When Silas and Eliza rode into Bitterroot Springs to file the marriage license, they could feel the shift in atmosphere. The whispers got louder, the stares more blatant, and when they walked into the territorial office, the clerk looked at them like they'd brought scandal with them. Mr. Granger, Miss Hart. The clerk's tone could have frozen water. What can I do for you? Marriage license, Silas said simply. I see. The clerk pulled out the necessary forms with obvious reluctance. You understand this will be a matter of public record? That's generally how legal documents work. Yes, well, given the circumstances of your... The clerk paused delicately. Cohabitation, I feel obligated to inform you that some members of the community have expressed concerns about the propriety of this union. Eliza leaned forward. Concerns or gossip? I'm merely conveying... You're merely trying to shame us for making an honest commitment instead of continuing an arrangement everyone's already decided is scandalous. Well, here's the truth. We're getting married because we love each other. Not to placate gossips, not to salvage reputation, but because we choose each other. Now either process the license or tell us outright you're refusing to do your job. The clerk's face went red, but he processed the paperwork. When they left the office, official license in hand, Sadie Mitchell was waiting on the boardwalk with a cluster of other town matrons. Mr. Granger, I really must speak with you about this hasty decision. Mrs. Mitchell, Silas's voice was polite but firm. My marriage is none of your concern. When you bring a woman of questionable character into our community and then legitimize the arrangement with marriage, it becomes everyone's concern. We have standards. No, you have opinions, and my life isn't subject to your approval. He took Eliza's hand. This woman has more character in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. She's honest, capable, and kind. If that's questionable by your standards, then your standards need adjusting. How dare you? How dare I stand up for the woman I love? How dare I choose my own path instead of the one you think I should follow? Mrs. Mitchell, I've turned down 43 marriage proposals because none of those women were right for me. Eliza is right for me. She makes me better. She makes my life fuller. And if you can't be happy about that, then at least have the decency to be silent about it. He walked away, Eliza beside him, leaving Sadie Mitchell sputtering in their wake. Half a block later, Eliza started laughing. What's funny? You, standing on Main Street defending my honor like some character in a dime novel. It's very heroic. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what makes it heroic. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for fighting for us, for not letting their judgment make you doubt what we have. Their judgment says more about them than us. We know the truth. That's enough. But that night, alone in his room, Silas wondered if it really was enough. The town's hostility was palpable, and he knew it would only get worse after the wedding. Eliza would face whispers and cold shoulders. People would assume she'd trapped him, that she was a gold digger who'd manipulated her way into wealth. The thought of her suffering that judgment because of him made his chest tight. The knock on his door came at midnight, Eliza reading his mind as she so often did. You're worrying about the town reaction. Am I that obvious? To me, yes. She came in and closed the door behind her. Silas, I knew what I was signing up for when I said yes. I've lived through being the subject of gossip before. I can handle it. You shouldn't have to. Maybe not. But this is the price of choosing each other in a world that wants to dictate how love should look, and I'd pay it 1,000 times over for what we have. She sat on the edge of his bed. Stop trying to protect me from consequences I've already accepted. I'm stronger than you think. I know how strong you are. I just wish what? That we could have this without the judgment? That would be nice, but it's not reality. Reality is, we're two people who found each other in unconventional ways, and we're building something unconventional together. Some people will never accept that, but their acceptance isn't required for our happiness. Silas sat beside her. When did you get so wise? About the same time you got brave enough to risk your heart again. She leaned against him. We're going to be fine, Silas. Better than fine. We're going to build a life that's real and honest and ours. Let the town gossip. Eventually they'll find something else to talk about. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks later. The ceremony was held in the ranch house parlor, with the furniture pushed back and every surface decorated with pine boughs and candles. The minister, a young man new to the territory who cared more about love than propriety, agreed to officiate. Tom stood up for Silas. Cookie gave Eliza away, tears streaming down his weathered face. Eliza wore a dress she'd sewn herself from blue wool, simple but beautiful. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of dried flowers Cookie had somehow procured. When she walked down the makeshift aisle, Silas felt his heart stop. This was real. This was happening. After 19 years of protecting himself, he was choosing vulnerability, choosing partnership, choosing love. The ceremony was brief. They said the traditional vows, but Silas added words of his own when it came time for promises. I promise to be honest with you, even when truth is hard. I promise to work beside you, not above you. I promise to see you clearly, your strength and your struggles, and choose you anyway. I promise that our partnership will always matter more than my pride. And I promise that this house, this ranch, this life we're building, it's ours together, equally, for as long as we both live. Eliza's voice shook when she made her promises in return. I promise to trust you, even when trust feels dangerous. I promise to be myself completely, without pretending or performing. I promise to call you on your walls when you start building them again, and to let you call me on mine. I promise that what we have is real, not an arrangement or a convenience, but a choice we make every single day. And I promise that I'll never make you regret taking a chance on damaged goods. You're not damaged, Silas said quietly, though it wasn't part of the vows. You're real. That's what I love about you. When the minister pronounced them married, the small gathering cheered. Cookie produced a feast that proved he'd been planning this for weeks. The ranch hands toasted them with whiskey and well wishes. And Silas Granger, who'd spent 19 years alone in a house too big for one man, finally had someone to share it with. That night, after the guests had gone and the house had quieted, Silas and Eliza stood together at his bedroom window, their bedroom window now, and watched snow begin to fall. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Not a single one." "You?" "Only that I didn't ride into town looking for you sooner." She turned in his arms, and he saw her smile in the moonlight. "You weren't ready sooner. Neither was I. We had to be broken enough to understand what healing looked like, lonely enough to recognize partnership when we found it." "You think that's what this is? Healing?" "I think it's better than healing. I think it's choosing to be whole together instead of staying safe and broken apart." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on an arrangement that didn't make sense to anyone but us. Thank you for offering it." He pulled her closer. "For seeing past the walls to what I was protecting, for being patient while I learned how to stop hiding." They stood like that, two people who'd been alone for different reasons, now choosing to face everything together. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Inside, the house that had been a monument to loneliness was finally, truly home. The next months proved both harder and easier than either expected. The town gossip continued for a while, whispers about hasty marriages and questionable circumstances. But Cookie was right. Eventually, something else captured everyone's attention, and the scandal of Silas Granger marrying his live-in partner faded into accepted history. What didn't fade was the partnership itself. Eliza transformed the ranch operations, implementing efficiencies that increased profits by 30% in the first year. She negotiated better contracts with suppliers, reorganized the breeding program, and won the grudging respect of every rancher in 3 counties with her sharp mind and sharper negotiating skills. Silas, for his part, learned to delegate, to trust, to understand that accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom. He taught Eliza everything he knew about cattle and land management and found that teaching her made him see his own work with fresh eyes. Together, they made the Double G not just profitable, but legendary. The ranch where a partnership between equals had built something greater than either could have achieved alone. A year after their wedding, Eliza found Silas in the barn and put his hand on her stomach. "We're going to need to add another room to the house." It took him a moment to understand. When he did, the joy was immediate and overwhelming. A child. They were going to have a child. The house his mother had designed for a family would finally fulfill its purpose. "Are you sure?" "Doctor confirmed it this morning. I'm about 3 months along." She was smiling, but he saw the fear underneath. "I know we didn't plan this. I know it's going to complicate everything." He kissed her quiet. "It's not a complication. It's a gift. You, me, a child, that's a family, Eliza. That's what this house was always meant to hold." The baby, a girl they named Grace, arrived in early autumn. She had Eliza's dark hair and Silas's stubborn chin, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she had both of them utterly wrapped around her tiny fingers. Holding his daughter for the first time, Silas thought about all the years he'd spent alone, all the walls he'd built, all the women he'd turned away because he'd been too proud or too scared to risk his heart. If Rebecca hadn't rejected him, he never would have built those walls. If he'd married any of those society daughters, he never would have been available when Eliza rode up to his gate. Every heartbreak, every lonely night, every choice to stay alone, all of it had led him here, to this moment, holding this child with this woman beside him. "Worth it," he said quietly. Eliza looked up from where she lay exhausted in their bed. "What is?" "All of it. The waiting, the walls, the years alone. It was all worth it to end up here." She smiled. "With damaged goods and a screaming infant? With my family. With the woman who saw past my walls and the daughter who'll never have to build any because she'll grow up knowing she's loved exactly as she is." Years passed. Grace grew strong and confident, raised by parents who taught her that capability mattered more than convention, that honesty was worth more than approval, that love was a choice you made every day, not a feeling that faded when tested. The town eventually forgot to judge them. Silas and Eliza became simply the Grangers, the couple who ran the best ranch in the territory, who treated their workers fairly, who raised their daughter with equal parts affection and expectation. Tom retired eventually, and they hired his son to take over as foreman. Cookie kept cooking until he was 83, then spent his final years telling anyone who'd listen about the stubborn rancher who'd almost missed his chance at happiness. And on winter nights, when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled, Silas and Eliza would stand together at their bedroom window, the same window where he'd spent so many lonely years, and watch the stars wheel overhead. "Any regrets?" he'd ask, the same question he'd asked on their wedding night. "Not a single one," she'd answer, the same as always. "You?" And every time his answer was the same. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." But they both knew the truth. They'd found each other exactly when they were supposed to. Two broken people who'd learned that damage didn't mean destroyed, that loneliness was a choice, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you needed someone. The Double G Ranch thrived for generations, passed down to Grace and her children and their children after. And every new generation heard the story of how it started. How the richest, loneliest man in Montana met a woman with nothing but honesty and capability, and how they built a life together that proved love didn't have to look like everyone expected to be real. They'd built it their way, honest, equal, and absolutely worth every risk they'd taken to find each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The house that had been too empty for one man became the heart of a family that lasted generations. The walls came down, the loneliness ended. And two people who'd sworn they were done with love learned that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. They lived the rest of their lives together, working side by side, building something that outlasted them both. Not just a ranch, but a legacy of choosing honesty over convention, partnership over pride, and love over safety. It was unconventional. It was unexpected. It was absolutely, perfectly right. And when Silas Granger died at 81, with his wife's hand in his and his family around him, his last words were the same ones he'd said on their wedding night. "Worth it, all of it, every moment." Eliza, holding his hand tight, whispered back the truth they'd lived together, every single one.